I'm Cóilín, and for those of you who were not here this morning, I along with Dara, run the Global Irish Studies program here in Georgetown, and I'm going to take chair's privilege here for a second just to say there are going to be a lot of thanks from Ted, don't know where, there's Ted, after this, but I just want to say that on behalf of me and Dara, a heartfelt thanks to particularly all of our astonishingly good panelists and speakers. They have set a high bar for us, actually, I will say.
Oops.
And a really warm thanks to all of you for being with us over the course of the day. It has been a delight to be here, and this has been a really, really engaging and fun day of conversation. So just from me, Ted, I know we'll say lots of thanks later, but from me, a warm thanks. It's been a lot of preparation, and everything has paid off in just the richness of the conversations and all your questions. Yeah. So our job is to talk about a different part of soft power, not necessarily the sort of politically organized or diplomatically run version of soft power, but the soft power that comes from culture, from literature, from music, from the way that the engagements between Ireland and America, particularly over the last sort of 50, 60 years, have in many ways been driven by image, by representation, by emotions, by feelings that have political outcomes. These are not sort of random soft things. They have a structure to them. And to help us do that, we have Mary Burke from University of Connecticut.
Yes.
And Mary, I should say, we have a very important omission in the program, and mea culpa on that one. Mary's recent book has won a number of prizes. And I just want to mention these very quickly. The Sharon Harris Award and honorable mention for the American Conference for Irish Studies. You may notice that half of our panelists here have won awards from the American Conference of Irish Studies. So I just wanted to add that to Mary's bio, and also the IACA Book Awards. We have Diane Negra from our partners in University College Dublin. Diane, you're particularly in the Clinton Institute, which is the small part of an enormous university that we work with so closely that Liam and Scott are with. Diane, you're very welcome as well. And Philip McGowan, also from our partner Queen's University Belfast. We've been working with Queen's for 7 years. We're expecting that Katie Hayward might be able to come as well today. She's not, but she has been to many of these conferences. But we're so happy to have been doing this work with Queen's University for all of this time. And Philip is a professor in the English department, and particularly of American Studies, and former, is it chair or president or something of the Irish?
Chair of the Irish, President of the European.
There you go. Chair of the Irish, President of the European Associations for American Studies. So we have an incredibly distinguished panel of Americanists, of Irish Americanists, and of people who have been thinking and teaching about the sort of the culture of Ireland and America for quite some time. We will have time for questions, so keep going.
Niche take on this. I'm really interested in couture, interested in Irish fashion, and I've been asking people today if they're wearing Irish tweed. Some people are. So if we think about the high-end goods that we get offered to this day in Ireland, we're talking about crystal, we're talking about hand-woven, if it's good quality, woolens of various sorts. That seems to be timeless, right? It's certainly marketed as if it's timeless, right? But there's actually a starting moment to a huge extent for all of this. And with that rise of Irish America with Kennedy, and I would actually go back 4 years earlier to the wedding of Grace Kelly, who becomes Princess of Monaco. I think that's an overlooked moment as well. And I think the couture moment is the 1950s. So we have an Irish woman-dominated industry that's an economic force. They have millions of pounds, I think it would have been at the time, worth of export. So I would start with maybe 47. Three important things happened in 1947. There's an agreement that American flights are coming into Shannon. There is the opening of the first duty-free in the world. What do you need for a duty-free? You need high-end goods for moneyed tourists. Those moneyed tourists were going to be American tourists. And then in 1947, you have maybe an exemplar of what I mean by kind of not so much an invention of tradition, but a revival, which is that there's a defunct crystal factory that closed in 1853. That's revived by two Czech immigrants to Ireland in 1947. And that is, of course, Waterford Crystal. So if you think about how Waterford is marketed as, being there from the 18th century, And of course, the great unspoken. Why does McGee, for instance, begin? It begins as a famine relief project to sort of give work to sort of women who had needlecrafts and spinning and so on. And also, Waterford probably closed, So that historical trauma gets written out. We get a sunnier version. Government agencies played an enormous and I think bureaucrats, unknown bureaucrats, played a tremendous role in this because there was tremendous agency support for these Irish industries. I interviewed a 90-something Irish designer about 10 years ago who had been active in this period. And he said he was funded by the Irish government. This is Jimmy Hurahan, for anyone who might know his name. He was funded by the Irish government on a 6-week junket to American department stores in the 1960s to promote his designer manufacturer goods. He was in business when I interviewed him still. In terms of the other side of the Atlantic, so you have tourists coming who are the purchase of this. Then there's a symbiotic relationship as well between all of these industries. They all work together for the greater good of Ireland. They're all selling Ireland. And one example of that I love is in 1959, Marilyn Monroe is on a film set. She needs an iron sweater. So Aer Lingus fly it over at no charge, right? Another, I think, and I'll finish with this, the cachet, the newly found cachet of these heavily subsidized, in some ways, couture, quality woolens and so on that are going to the American market, that cachet then had a symbiotic relationship with the cachet of the new Irish-American elite. And by that I mean there's a fabulous photograph of the new Princess of Monaco skippering a yacht in a Monaco harbour wearing an iron sweater, looking fabulous. If we go over to the White House and you see the official portrait of Mrs. Kennedy, she is wearing an Ulster linen gown designed by her personal friend, the jet-set Irish designer Sybil Connolly. So, as I said, that cachet is kind of bridging the Atlantic, I suppose. Yeah.
Part of the story that you're sketching out here is that the image, the traditional image of what made Ireland in the mid-20th century, and in part, I would say, is still selling Ireland today in many ways, that traditional image is profoundly modern. That the image of the cottage industry, the image of these sort of hand looms and everything else are actually profoundly engaged with the modernization of Ireland.
Absolutely, modernization. Yeah. So I suppose in a nutshell, if you think of a beautiful couture suit from Ireland from 1965, we'll say, the cut is up to the minute. It's cutting edge fashion. What's traditional is the wonderful hand-loomed tweed or wool or whatever. And so lace was used, handmade lace. Obviously, Ulster linen has this whole long history. And we can get into that because it becomes very complicated as to whether you market it as Irish or Ulster linen. But yes, so it's kind of harnessing. The way I've written about it is that the Irish government used traditional crafts as a shop window to promote industrialisation and so on, investment, tourism.
Diane, if we could turn to you much later, I would say. Your work really has been a focus on charting the rise of what we might think of as a sort of a idealized Irish culture more recently, and even a celebrity Irish culture, the way that Irish culture is being exported and created. And I will say for the audience, we have a little bit of a light relief right now. Russell, are we good to play? We have 2 short clips. We're not saying that you might not be up to the minute on TikTok videos. But what we're saying is you might not be up to the minute on TikTok videos, so we'll show them for you.
There's a short warning for profane language.
Oh, profane language, which is not Irish at all.
Still yourself.
Russell, how are we doing on being... here we go.
Day 3 of Ireland being completely buried in snow. The Irish people have started to make snowmen. I'm going to review some of the snowmen you sent me. Number 1 here, obviously, completely fucking terrifying. Strangely enough, this looks like a good few people's father that I know. Do not give snowmen eyebrows because it makes it look like they have feelings and they're going to fucking melt. And then you have to live with that. So there's a lot going on here. First of all, there does appear to be an otherworldly apparition in your back garden. So maybe ring the priest and get the garden blessed. Also, this one has a wheelbarrow, which at first I thought was absolutely adorable. Oh, isn't it darling? He's out with his wheelbarrow. But then I realised the wheelbarrow's full of snow, and he is a snowman, which is actually quite fucked up. Coupled with the otherworldly being, this one is making me feel uncomfortable, so I'm going to give it a 4 out of 10. I don't know, there's just something about him. I don't trust him. 7 out of 10. It's great to see the people of Limerick taking a stab at building a snowman as well. It's gigantic, very impressive. 10 out of 10. You need to accept that you did not get enough snow to build a snowman. You've used every fucking morsel of snow within a 2-kilometre radius to cobble together this pile of shite. 2 out of 10. Fucking filthy. Will you use clean snow? There's plenty of it there. Don't be fucking lazy. 2 out of 10. And you fucking stolen a traffic cone. You're an absolute degenerate. 5 out of 10. Here we have one from Mayo, which is where I'm from. They've put the carrot in the wrong way around. Yeah, that's people from Mayo. Follow me. I'm delicious. Day 3 of Ireland being completely buried in snow. The Irish people have started to make snowmen.
I think we have another quick one.
There's a second clip. He'll just need a minute to get it queued.
We're just waiting for the other one to queue up.
Good luck, Paddy. It was lovely to see you. Yeah, see you now, Paddy. Ah, Jesus, Paddy's a great man, isn't he? Oh, he is, yeah. He's a legend. I know, he's a great chap now, and he wouldn't say a bad word about anyone. I know, he's a good man. Is he a bit of a bollocks, though? He is. And is his father a bit of a cunt? He would be, yeah. Good luck, Paddy. It was lovely to see you. Yeah, see you now, Paddy. Ah, Jesus, Paddy's a great man, isn't he?
That's it. Thank you.
Diane, I don't even have a question for this. My question is going to be, please explain yourself.
I'll be happy to try. Yeah, no, I suppose I should say first that my title is Professor of Film Studies and Screen Culture, and I very much work on low culture. So, but it seems to me that what I want to contribute to this discussion is to underscore a celebrification of Irishness that is certainly not historically unrehearsed. Mary has just alluded to Grace Kelly, but that has distinct 21st century features. And the cultural traffic lanes, I think, that exist right now between Ireland and the US are significantly inflected by digital celebrity, and particularly the celebrity-driven short-form media ecosystem is critical, I think, to vernacular cultures of Irishness. So what I'm arguing is that really forms of micro-celebrity play a significant role in what we might think of as the imaginative cartilage between the US and Ireland, particularly as so many of us now move and trade in a culture of profuse but often shallow communication forms. And so this makes space, in my view, for Garen Noon, who you've just looked at. And I specifically chose 2 very different pieces of his work. But Noon is an early 30s social media figure from Mayo, as you heard. And I think it's worth asking, who he speaks to and on what terms. And I think, particularly as I hope you saw with the snowman clip, he specializes in cultural minutiae. He trades in what I think of as a mode of expository Irishness, which is to say that he explains and interprets elements of Irish culture to both a home audience and to an audience in this country where we find ourselves today. And then the last thing I'll say, because I know we have other points to make, but I think it's important to notice that Noon also authenticates himself quite precisely through his florid use of profanity, but also through his proficient use of a kind of idiomatic Hiberno-English. So I just want to start by making the point that if we're going to try to account for the nature of the current relationship in play between our 2 countries, between Ireland and the United States, that we need to notice people like Garen Noon and the whole kind of population of similar figures who I think in many ways articulate an Irishness that is being taken note of and absorbed and has a cultural impact.
This is interesting that you say, so you talked about expository Irishness. If we think about like Noon's work, which we've seen excellent examples of, there is a sort of a building of an authenticity, a building, you talk about the accent, which is, at times almost overdone, I would say, in certain ways, and the sort of the idea of exposition. There is a building of a sort of an authenticity and a strangeness that you would imagine would not actually transcend borders or bridge the Atlantic or cross borders. How does that work? That sort of particular, sort of almost the in-story of a particular version of Irishness that somehow has managed to spread. I mean, he is very popular globally.
Yeah, I think he speaks of and to the nation in a register that's very appealing, which is sort of fond irascibility. And he's clearly not a beauty influencer, and he's kind of the opposite of a more polished influencer figure. And I don't mean that as a kind of slur. It's just the way that he presents himself. He's very much a product of what, you know, theorists in my field call the demotic turn. In the demotic turn, reality TV and social media produce ordinary people and their everyday lives as popular culture, right? So his focus is always on the banal. But having said that, I think particularly in the second clip, I think the second clip gets at something very trenchant about, you know, culturally ingrained styles of communication. So I think having established that bond with an audience that is, again, I emphasize, both at home and then abroad, he is then able to, if he so wishes, and I'm not saying every piece he makes, you know, works in this kind of way, but that he has the capacity to engender a pretty withering social critique.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, you know, comparing that to the work that Mary was speaking about earlier, and obviously in a different era, is that there's a wide gap in terms of resources needed, in terms of the possibility of spreading this information. Philip, I'm going to make you the type of your race in some way to speak in the Joycean phrase, because we have been, you know, we started the way that Ireland is packaged and sold in the US, or at least sold overseas. And I think one of the things that is very noticeable right now is that Northern Irish culture, for example, has really become a very clear and I would say quite differentiated version of an Irish culture. I mean, look, we all we need to think about is Dairy Girls, et cetera, et cetera. But even the demotic turn, I was thinking about Kneecap. And the way that Kneecap has become globally visible, not just for, you know, sort of quite controversial statements, but also for its music, for its attention to the Irish language, to a particular politics of Northern Ireland that has often seemed off limits in some way. How has Northern Ireland sort of differentiated, or has Northern Irish culture sort of become its own version of itself?
Well, if I'd known we were showing clips, I would have. There's a really hilarious social media clip about different flavors of gravy between Catholic and Protestant gravy in the north, and there is somebody who goes to different chip shops and she samples the gravy, and you know, there is a difference. Obviously, there's no doubt about it. I think one of the things that the north, or Northern Ireland, depending on your persuasion, or Ulster, or the 6 counties, or Ulster -3, or whatever way you want to refer to the entity that is part of where I live. I think one of the things that it has differentiated itself around, and it's a sort of an ironic thing, is something that might be better referred to as disaster tourism or dark tourism. You know, we've made a lot of play of the whole Titanic situation, and Titanic Belfast was the world's most visited tourist attraction just before COVID. Like that seems quite an odd thing when you think about exactly what is being commemorated there. And then on top of that, so like I went to university in Dublin, but I am from Belfast. And now that I'm back in Belfast, it is really surprising to see tourism happening right outside Queen's. And you can barely get parked at Queen's as it is, but now there's tourist buses everywhere. You really can't get parked. So, like, you know, tell us you're coming first. That's the first thing. But I do think that you mentioned Dairy Girls, and I think there's something about Dairy Girls. Where it ends is kind of one of the problems that Northern Ireland has. It ends with the Good Friday Agreement and the vote to say yes, 74%, etc. And it's like there's nothing after that. And that has become, into that vacuum has come different expressions of what it means to be in the North, or the part of the Northern Irish experience. And either it's like Game of Thrones stuff, and we play that up, and the Dark Hedges, etc. Or we have Kneecap, who come in, and I don't know how many people here have seen the Kneecap movie. Yeah, quite a few. It's interesting. I was talking to Richard Cushing about this earlier. It's really interesting. In that absence of something to say about Northern Ireland, they just repeat the division. Yeah. Northern Ireland, north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, north of Ireland. Or lots of profanity and lots of like blatant sexism, which is not exactly a great advert for where we're from. So there's something that the North hasn't quite necessarily thought about what's going to happen next. But there's also this feeling, and like Liam's here, so I'm not alone in the room, that there's a feeling of we are different. It is a different experience. It's always been a different experience. Yeah. And whether that's from one side of the community who has maybe justifiably felt abandoned for the last 30 or 40 years, or another side that feels much more committed to a British sense of identity. That division is something that has actually allowed us a position within the conversation to be able to position ourselves kind of not against the Republic or the South, but in kind of juxtaposition with it. And I also think one of the things, I'll stop on this, one of the things that the North has produced, and I think it came up in the last panel before the Minister was speaking, was Brexit.
Yeah.
And we, like the North, we were the fly in the ointment. You know, really, like that. The whole process was so drawn out just because of us. So sorry, but it's also been, and this has come up, and it came up in the car yesterday with Scott and Liam. It's kind of good for business. It's been really good for Queens. Brexit has been really useful. Like you mentioned, Katie Hayward. Like Katie's reputation has gone through the roof. If you're watching this, Katie, you know I love you, but like it really has helped. And it's also changed a dynamic in terms of when we get a lot of American students come now to Queen's. And part of the sell, and it is a sell, like let's be honest, but part of the sell is if you want to be somewhere that is actually thinking about questions of identity and allegiance and rights and citizenship, belonging, you come to Belfast because we are talking about borders and beyond borders. We're talking about whether there's going to be a unification vote or not, how that might go. Sinn Féin are just waiting out the clock maybe on that one. And I think there's an energy about the North, which is reflected in parts of what, like, say, Kneecap do, but there's also, you know, rappers on the Protestant side. Young Spencer, I don't know if many people know Young Spencer. Yeah, you know, it's interesting, but I don't think he's going to be ever on the Kneecap scale. So there's a kind of flux as well as an inertia in the North, which is really kind of puzzling sometimes to understand.
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to what Kimberly was saying earlier about, Kimberly is an amazing teacher. You should all take classes with her. But there are reasons why classes like Dara's classes here are full on the north of Ireland, is that it remains, first of all, it remains an American success story. So part of that's quite a successful thing to sell is, you know, look at this place now, you can visit, you can go and take a black taxi tour. But it also, you know, remains a place for complex identities and discussions of identities. I just wanted to follow up very quickly because you point out that Derry Girls Earls ends in 1998, and in many ways there are a lot of conversations here in DC that end in 1998 with the Good Friday Agreement as well, right? So, you know, we spoke last week. You were talking about like how the North has changed, and whether in fact Northern Irish culture has what we see in the US as Northern Irish culture, whether that has kept touch with, and you know, Diane, this is obviously something very very similar in Dublin in particular as well. Whether that culture has kept in touch with, and whether it is selling a vision of a country that has profoundly changed from the time that Mary was speaking about, or even in 1998.
Well, I think since 1998, and you know, obviously it's a lot better having peace than not having peace. Like, let's not pretend otherwise. But we are in a political vacuum. I was talking again, and you know, Richard isn't here now, but the work of the Northern Irish Bureau, like, we cannot overstate how important they have been for connecting the North to the United States. They do so much amazing work on our behalf. And in fact, they step into that vacuum that has been left by the two main political parties in the North. You know, once the Good Friday Agreement happens, you know, things just polarize quite nicely for DUP and Sinn Féin, and anyone who was involved in the initial conversations are kind of sidelined. And now we've reached a kind of impasse where the North sort of has two parties which are in government together but aren't really talking to each other and aren't really doing very much. And in that absence of anything else, then other things must take that place. And I do think, you know, I know Sinn Féin are kind of interested in the idea of a vote on reunification by 2030. I think that's ambitious, but, you know, let's see. There's no real appetite on maybe that side of the conversation to change much now, because we've had 1998, and the next thing must be when there is a reunification. That's just it. Whereas on the unionist side, I think it's more challenging because unionism hasn't necessarily got the leadership that it might require to be able to make that case post-Brexit that this is a good thing to still be doing. And then, I'll not, we know about the court cases and stuff for Jeffrey Donaldson, etc. So we can leave those things out. But there's a challenge in the North for that side of the conversation to be able to put its case in any sort of understanding.
And I think that's also an imaginative and cultural challenge. What story do you tell about we would like to keep the same thing going? Diane, I sort of alluded there to changes on the island of Ireland, demographic changes, and I know that your work has also been on the diversity of Irish America as well. In what sense has Irish American culture, to your knowledge, has sort of kept up with the reality of an Ireland, 21%, or it goes up all the time, 21% of the people, at least in the Republic, having been born overseas. I mean, that is a rapidly shifting dynamic that even, somebody like Garen Noon, we might even talk about it when he was cancelled for a very short time.
He was, yeah. No,
we could start there.
Yeah. I guess probably just taking you up on that invitation to say that, as many in the room will probably know, that the high point possibly for Noon was last spring when he was involved in a kind of love fest with RTE, and it was looking like a powerful synergistic co-branding was playing out, and then he made a few comments on immigration and his kind of. He experienced a rapid reversal of fortune, not an entire reversal of fortune, but it really, kind of, I think, illustrated, among other things, just the extent to which that's a kind of third rail right now in Irish political discourse. So, but to come back to your first point, Cóilín, I think. Well, one thing that we haven't, I think, mentioned so far today that interests me very much is a kind of new, I mean, the book I did 20 years ago, The Irish and Us, sort of touches on this a little bit because I was really intrigued with how Irish affiliators, let's put it that way, could negotiate what seemed to be an increasingly significant dilemma of whiteness by claiming Irishness, and that still happens. But I think it's happening in some very interesting new ways. And one that stands out for me is what's been dubbed the Rosie O'Donnell effect, right? Which is the kind of sense that politically alienated Americans who feel connected to Ireland, and if they feel a heritage connection in particular, that they are prepared now to operationalize previously rhetorical claims to homeland access. And we know that many more are making applications for passports. It's a little harder to get a sense. It's still kind of an emergent phenomenon, but it appears to be a real phenomenon that alienated and alarmed citizens of this country are making relocation plans, so that whether they'll carry on in the face of the weather and lack of certain conveniences, I suppose, might be a question, but they do seem to be drawn to negotiate what some perceive as a problematic American national identity in ways far beyond what was the norm before, which might have included tourism and genealogical research or the consumption of certain kinds of brands, foods, things of that nature, or just in general thinking of oneself as Irish. It's a very different thing to become an expat.
Yeah. And Mary, that actually brings, and I realize I promised the audience questions, but I'm too interested in this. No, we will have questions just after this. Mary, that brings us to your latest book, in a way, about the sort of the long history of the invention of Irishness and the relationship between particularly American literature and the invention of Irishness in America and the Irish American and the negotiation of race, of belonging, of identity and relationship back to the island. So maybe you could tell us a little bit about that long history. And spoiler alert, this brings us to Scots-Irish, Ulster Scots. It brings us to a really complicated story.
I can get back to Grace Kelly if you want.
Please.
So I guess I would start with, I think we've all heard the notion of the Irish whitened, right? The post-famine Irish whitened eventually. Whitened? So this notion that they were considered off-white, that they weren't, fully assimilated, assimilable, all of that idea. And that is slowly, by oppressing African Americans, as the narrative goes, they sort of achieved the desired kind of assimilation. I think as well, earlier on, the earlier cohort before the famine Irish, the Scots-Irish, the Ulster Irish, they too struggled, right? They were, Franklin condemned a certain Scotch-Irish cohort in the 1630s as, listen to this phrase, Christian white savages. Okay, they do begin to assimilate, obviously, but and I think this tracks onto our present moment, where everything is massively in flux, and all the old certainties suddenly get thrown up, because, of course, 1798 throws everything into flux again. And this actually marks a very canonical American text. There's a 1799 text by a Pennsylvania Quaker, a very conservative Quaker, called Charles Brockton Brown, which is about, so 1799 is the novel. It's about a Scots-Irish servant who does violence, inexplicable violence in Dublin, then makes his way to Pennsylvania and does the same there. So you have, obviously, he's part of the British colony in Ireland. He makes his way to the British colony, and it's set in the 1780s, published in 1799. And so there's a terrible anxiety in the novel about these immigrants, these revolutionary radical immigrants. 1798, of course, we all know what happened in Ireland in 1798, but 1798 in the US, of course, was the Alien and Sedition Acts as well. And on the floor, as this was discussed in America, it was called upon to keep out hordes of wild Irishmen. So there was a distinct anxiety around radicalized, and of course the 1798 revolution. There was a massive Ulster Presbyterian cohort that led that. Of course, then they do eventually, assimilate, despite these hiccup moments. Henry James is a great example of somebody who is Scots-Irish, whose own father, I always call him the first Irish-American tourist. He went to Ireland in 1837, Henry James's father, to visit the family homestead. He really is the first Irish-American tourist. But Henry wants nothing to do with that, even though his own sister was totally in love with Parnell and called herself an Irish nationalist and so on. But he himself chose not to. He has a kind of refusenick kind of depictions of Irishness, quite hostile depictions of Irishness in his work. So there's an anxiety there in him, a kind of a rejection of his ancestry. The term then that's applied, I suppose, that we see in the literature, that we see in the letters of writers, particularly of F. Scott Fitzgerald's notorious, description of himself in a letter to his fellow Irish-American novelist, John O'Hara, as Black Irish. What on earth does he mean by that? So I tracked that backwards. That basically evolved after the famine to contrast the new influx to, and again, this is obviously the people who are there before them are now implicitly white Irish, right? The Protestant Irish America is now white Irish, and the people who come after are then racialized in this way. Where this gets really interesting is when you get an actual Black Irish writer, an African-American and Irish writer. And the case I was really interested in was a best-selling author called Frank Yerby. In 1954, Time magazine names him as the richest writer in America. He's massively successful. He's from Georgia. He's Scots-Irish on his mother's side, and he's really, really interested, I suppose for his personal reasons, in the conflict of Irish engagements with race. His breakout bestseller was about a Dublin-born planter in Georgia. Sorry, anyway, Louisiana. That term then, Black Irish, is not available to Frank Yerby himself. His Irishness is doubly visible because the Scots-Irish are so assimilated now that he's not Irish. And he's also, of course, not Irish because he's not white and he's not Catholic and so on. So his Irishness is absolutely invisible, and it's only beginning to be kind of addressed by scholars in very recent years.
Thanks for that. I'm going to open it to audience questions. You'll see that our sort of conversation so far has ranged widely and really sort of brings us to all of these limit cases and strange cases, the places where sort of culture throws up these other versions of Irishness, of northernness, and even of Irish Americanness. And those are the sort of the places where, outside of the official narratives, we begin to understand this negotiation of identity across the Atlantic. Are there questions from the audience? I think we have some roving mics. There's one right here in the front. Kayla here, just here. Oh, there you go. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Siobhan Cooney. I work for Georgetown School of Foreign Service on the communications team, but I'm also a graduate student at Georgetown's Communication, Culture, and Technology program. And I'm also a lifelong Irish dancer and an Irish dance journalist, actually, for a small Irish dance publication. And so I was wondering if any of you have thoughts on the role of Irish dance in this kind of like green cultural wave, obviously starting all the way Riverdance at the Eurovision in 1994, and then Lord of the Dance, Celtic Tiger boom, and sort of the explosion of Irish dance that we've seen on TikTok starting in 2019 and 2020. And also, of course, the continued presence of competitive Irish dance all across the United States and all across the world. And so it's something that I've thought a lot about and written about, and I would love to know if any of you have thoughts on that, especially the kind of the celebrification of Irishness.
Are you thinking about
media.
Morgan Bullock a little bit?
Oh yes, I know her very well, and the Gardner brothers, Corja, all those guys,
First of all, you should read an article by Eleanor O'Leary on this subject. It's very smart. She spends a lot of time on TikTok. I do not. But I think she really is, I couldn't name very many scholars, I think, who are making sense of Irish digital culture, but she is one, and I would definitely recommend her work. This is a really interesting question. I mean, I think it goes back quite a ways. Certainly some of the work that I did quite a long time ago, trying to take stock of Celtic Tiger era affinities between the US and Ireland, did look in that direction. Riverdance is absolutely indispensable to that. And there's a wonderful Saturday Night Live parody that I think I've shown it when we were at a conference together called Celtic Woman, which does a kind of parody of this. I would just mention one thing in particular, which is the importance of Irish dance to Sinners, the Ryan Coogler film. So that to me is the freshest and most recent example. And it is incredibly complexly racially coded, and the best thing I could say about Sinners was something that a ticket taker in the cinema, Dundrum, said to me a couple of months ago. He said, Sinners, that dance performance, it's the most hostile form of Irish dancing since Trump's inaugural ball, right? If you remember that dark river dance that was trotted out at one of the inaugural balls, which is a terrifying spectacle and prescient in many ways. So I to answer your question briefly, and Mary and others I'm sure could add quite a bit more, to say that the way in which Riverdance brought Irish dance into a sort of American mainstream view, made it very much a practice of white middle class girls and boys, I guess, too. Its evolution, let's say, since the days of the Celtic Tiger, helps us maybe to grasp better hold of how that very important form has mapped changes, maybe not always huge ones, but still nevertheless significant ones in the evolving relationship between the two cultures.
I have a few words to say about Irish dance as well. I'm currently writing an article on Sinners and sort of its engagement with Irish culture. It's called Riverdance in Hell. I'm actually under the remit of Ireland and the Making of America, and Liam has a fabulous website. We are running something at UConn on February 26th. You're all welcome. But one of our participants is a scholar dancer called Rebecca McGowan. Do you know Rebecca McGowan? Okay, so Rebecca's coming. She does research into sort of oral history. She also, the reason I invited her is that I have personal experience of her classes. She doesn't agree with the sort of codification of Irish dance. We can move our hands if we want to. She does the Shannon style, which is the really, again, before codification. She also invites always practitioners from other dance traditions. So we've hosted Indian dancers and so on at her classes. So she's a very 21st century, I think, attitude to sort of Irish dance and who can participate and how they can participate. So she's great. And you're all welcome February 26th at UConn.
We're all plugging our own conversations because this is going to be a very, very busy year of America 250. I think, so it's going to go, Cian, you have a microphone in your hand, so may as well start and then we'll move over here,
Thank you, I'll move the microphone over.
Maybe we'll take, because I'm just thinking of time, we might take 3 questions at once. So maybe Cian and Dara, Kate over here, and then there's down here. So Kayla, can you... once Cian has relinquished the microphone, no more than 10 minutes, Cian.
It seemed like it's my 2 hands. No, I don't actually want to. I want to say thanks first of all for a fantastic panel, and just to make a little comment on Mary's point about the commodification of Irishness in the mid-20th century, and I wanted to just share that it made me think about some of the reading I've been doing on St. Patrick's Day in Dublin, which in 1950 changes from being a very staid military parade into this kind of carnivalesque parade down O'Connell Street. Some people say that it's the Dublin was importing the American parade, but if you look at the Dublin parade, it's tractors and silly floats and nothing like Manhattan. But I just wanted to say that it was another way, and I hadn't thought of couture, so thank you for that. Thank you.
Kayla, there are two hands over here. Kate, we'll go straight to Kate, and then we'll take one more question in this round, just so that we get as many questions and answers as possible in there. Yeah.
Hi, thank you, panelists. It's Kate Minawa from Solus Nua, which means New Light. We're the contemporary Irish arts organization here in DC. And if you could make comment on how particularly film and literature have reflected and created a notion for us in the US what it means to be Irish now.
Is there a third question to take?
At the back.
At the back. Right at the back.
Fanula Quinn. I wasn't sure if I would expose any of my personal background, except for you triggered me with Dundrum, because I grew up in Dundrum and was parachuted into the US as a young graduate in a time, the pre-information age, so I had no idea, straight into American city government. So fast forward a few decades, and I am going around American suburbs, Hebrew school in the morning, Irish classes in the afternoon. My children were culturally Jewish. I was like, they're American. We're not going to say they're Irish American. They've all lived in Ireland for extended periods. They have spent every year going to Ireland, all sorts of Irish stuff now. They're extremely knowledgeable. They get policed that they're not Irish. They can't be Irish because of their background. They can't be both. And I actually get policed too as not being Irish, although I'm like, or not being an immigrant. Because I'm like, well, if I'm not an immigrant and I have no relatives within thousands of miles and my mother lives in Dublin. So, there's a lot of this policing of who is Irish or Irish American, at least in our experience. Now, in my family, we all just laugh at it. We think these things are very funny, but they can be quite strong, what people say to them. So anyway.
Very good. Thanks. I'll hand over to you. You can fight amongst yourselves for those questions.
I just go back to Sinners really briefly. I think Sinners is not so much speaking to, I know the question was what it means to be Irish now, but I think Sinners is acknowledging that in order to understand now, we need to really try and understand history and sort of the complexity of Irish history. And people keep reviewing Sinners as talking about the Irish. I think it's talking about this amalgamation of Scots-Irish and the Irish. They're coded Scots-Irish in certain ways. They're coded, post-famine Irish in others. And I think that's the whole point of the film, is trying to sort of unpack this complicated history and this engagement with whiteness of Irishness, this culpable relationship.
It also plays into the representation of Irish people in the 1800s through temperance literature.
Absolutely.
And then that connects in through Prohibition into what's happening in the 1920s.
And I think our friend Andrew Jackson is back there as well, because that particular Native American cohort who are very wary and know exactly what they're looking at were one of those peoples that he drove out.
No, Sinners is fascinating. Like, I watched it again on the plane coming over, and I just
so
burst out laughing because I was like, here we go again with the river dance. It was enough of a nightmare the first time, but now they're vampires.
Of course.
Yeah. Well, what else could they be?
Should we pick up on the point that...
go ahead, or Cian's point as well, because I know that, go ahead.
I'll just very briefly say your question is incredibly important and would take a very long time to answer comprehensively or even minimally adequately. But I think a couple things. One, the rise of Irish language media. That I think we should probably be attentive, and I think that contrasting cases in this country of The Quiet Girl and Banshees of Inisherin is revealing, because The Quiet Girl is a masterpiece. Banshees of Inisherin, you might say the same. I probably wouldn't, but it's a good film. But I happened to be here at the time that those films rolled out, and it was amazing to see how the affability and chat show presence of the stars and the blokiness of the promotion around that film pushed it, and the recognizability of the stars, whereas The Quiet Girl did nothing like the business I think it should have done in this country. So even as Irish media production is surging, Screen Ireland has more money than they know what to do with, apparently. There's a lot going on in television. There's a lot going on in Irish crime TV, notably, print fiction, Tana French, etc. I mean, the market is big enough now to sustain recognizably old-fashioned versions of Irish sentimentality on Netflix alongside new kind of crime fiction stuff, and I find that very interesting. But that doesn't mean that it all has the same level of access into this media market. And the relative failure of The Quiet Girl in this country strikes me as something we should be talking about more for those who think about Irish media and how to push its circulation globally, because it's a masterpiece that wasn't nearly as widely seen as it should be. So to briefly answer your question, I would say this is a very buoyant moment in media production, but there are certain kinds of things that fit into a pre-existing template, and Banshees very much does, and therefore have a leg up when it comes to marketing.
I will just speak for Kate here. Is that okay, Kate? Solas Nua hosts the largest Irish film festival in North America, and 2 years ago on Cóilín was the feature of the film festival. We had 400 people in the audience for a sold-out screening.
But can I say that was exceptional?
It was exceptional, yeah. So, yeah. Yeah,
okay.
yeah.
Happy to hear it.
Philip,
well done to you.
So just to follow up on that, so on my way here, your university never kind of lets you alone. So there's always meetings going on and numbers being flying around. And I received data, the point in time numbers in Queen's today of applications for Irish courses and Irish undergraduate courses. This time last year, point in time, we had 34 applications across different degrees. This year we have 118.
From North America?
No, not from North America, just from everywhere, whether that's Europe or Ireland, Republic of Ireland, North of Ireland. There's a new LLB in law with Irish, which we're starting 56 applications out of nowhere. Irish in broadcasting, which we're starting 42 applications. And so it feeds right into what you're saying, Diane, that there is clearly a market for Irish or Irish language, Irish identity, in a way that wouldn't be the same for Ulster Scots or Scots. Let's be honest. No. Yeah. And one thing else I did, and this is kind of interesting because Kimberly was talking about this earlier. I looked up the data from the 2021 census in the North, and that one of the things that census brought up was the fact that we're all minorities now in the North. There's no majority population, and that does change the dynamics of things. But for people who said that what their main language was, 8,978 said Lithuanian in the North, which is the third most spoken language in Northern Ireland. English is first, Polish is second, Lithuanian is third. Irish is fourth. Ulster Scots is 32nd. 385 people claimed that they spoke Ulster Scots as their main language. And Scots comes down below Armenian, 11 each. More people do Irish Sign Language, 90 of them, than speak Scots. So it's kind of interesting to see where, like, the kind of fracturing of the northern communities and where they go and what they say they do.
Yeah, and how we represent ourselves through these languages. What kinds of representation are possible through these languages. Mary, do you want to speak to Cian's question about St. Patrick's? I think you might be a person about the sort of the way that the St. Patrick's phenomenon was being invented in Dublin at the same time. You don't have, you can refuse the fence if you want.
Can I talk about St. Bridget instead?
Yeah.
So I'm noticing, I'm calling a paradigm shift. For the first time ever this year, I got a bunch of emails from female friends wishing me Happy St. Bridget's Day.
Yes.
This just happened.
Yeah.
And I started thinking about this, and obviously, I'm interested in Grace Kelly as somebody who gets married, has a massive wedding watched by 30 million people globally. It's this globally visible ascent, right, to assimilation, right, to breaking the ultimate sort of glass ceiling for the Irish in America. So I'm really interested in sort of shifting and thinking about women. So if we talked a little bit about Bridget instead, and another fascinating thing about Bridget, again, just in terms of that sense of maybe it's an attempt to represent what hasn't been given voice. I just found this out at a St. Bridget's event I went to in Boston last week. She was the daughter of an enslaved woman. Never knew that. That's not what we learn in school, right? So there's ways of approaching Bridget that could really kind of open it out. The event in Boston was all women performers performing works of art by other women, including like Sinead O'Connor and so on. And there was no reference to drinking Guinness and so on. It just seemed it had a different vibe. It was interesting.
I just want to point out, so for those of you who are not, because it is quite a new turn, the St. Bridget turn,
right?
But that too. So Diane, you mentioned Screen Ireland and Culture Ireland and Film Ireland, and also in the north, huge investment in film. Mary, you started by pointing out that a lot of the work around the 1950s and the invention of this tradition in the 1950s was agency supported, by government agency supported. So too is St. Bridget's Day. Like, this was a sort of a government decision to find a counterbalance to the particular version of Irishness that was being sold through March. So there are ways that...
There's an appetite for it too, though, I guess what I'm feeling.
There's a very hungry appetite for it, but there are also ways that that certain kinds of government decisions north and south of the border
Same with Women's Christmas.
Exactly, are making real inroads into how we understand and how we shift sort of these traditional notions of Irish culture that have stuck for decades now. And so it's really interesting to see that shift happening actually through, on one hand you could say that's sinister through government engagement. On the other hand, it opens up a space for potentially more complicated versions of Irishness. Can we do a quick round, and I'm going to ask you all to be really quick, a quick round of more questions. We'll take 3 and we'll ask for quick answers on it. Very good, yeah.
Hi, thank you. Well, actually, just to start on St. Bridget, to let people know that this Monday, the Irish Embassy are hosting, for the very first time, Women in Tech in honour of St. Bridget. So it's actually here among us.
She'd be delighted.
So this is all very positive. And I guess I don't want to bring down the mood now, but I would like to say as well, there's a kind of maybe a darker side of modern Ireland, bridging the Atlantic and after the Good Friday. That hasn't been talked about at all, but it's quite horrific for maybe Irish people who've left and are looking back at Ireland and what's happening. And this anti-immigration. Yes. And if you think Garth Noon was saying terrible things about immigration in Ireland, and he was rightfully cancelled, I think, he carelessly, but he was anti-immigrant. You have maybe, in the north, Protestants and Catholics are marching together against it. So
I'm coming up from the south,
divided by politics, united by racism.
It's
awful. To be an Irish person means to travel and be welcomed all over the world, and to look at your own country and see that kind of darkness. And even kneecap, it's exciting, the language and seeing the Irish language, but there's an aggression to kneecap. There's an aggression that maybe people like me who have left Ireland, we want to be welcomed. And I think being Irish is being friendly and being welcoming. And there's a very worrying, and maybe, sometimes how it's reported, you misinterpret, but there's definitely a dark side to modern Ireland that hasn't been discussed here at all. And I don't want to bring the mood down, but I think it is there, it is out there, and it's a kind of horrible thing.
I think actually we might take answers on that question. And the important part of this too bridges the Atlantic is that so much of that is also, and this is not to say Irish people are blameless, that's not true, but so much is also being driven by a particular version of politics in the US that's also having a huge impact. You think about the idea of Steve Bannon wanting to create a new nationalism in Ireland, and so there's that part actually sort of as part of this the globalization of a particular kind of anti-immigrant status. So maybe I'll ask the 3 of you to maybe comment about that in various ways, if that's okay. But that's a great place. In fact, that was in my notes as the next place to go. So
it's okay if I start? Yeah. So my first book was on the traveller figure, a historically nomadic population in Ireland. Everybody knows who they are, right? So the traveller figure in Irish literature. They were considered a kind of an outsider caste within the country. They were Irish, of Irish ancestry, but they were racialized as different, right? There was tremendous vigilante violence against travellers. They were burnt out of their houses when they attempted to settle in Galway in the 1970s. Mm-hmm. I think we have... Well, let me put it this way. If somebody from an ethnic minority is a bad actor, do you say everybody from that ethnic minority are therefore bad actors? Travellers had to stand in for their community in a way that a mainstream Irish person was never asked to do, right? But I think we have not processed that history in Ireland, and because we have not processed it, we haven't theorized our relationship to whiteness, our relationship to difference, our difference within our own community. And so I think that I always go backward and say, well, what's the history we haven't processed that sort of leads to the current sort of blindness, you know?
Yeah. Diane, did you want to jump in there? I think,
maybe just really briefly to speak to the point, which is entirely well made, but I actually see somebody like Garen Noon, for all his affability, doing a couple of important things. And one is he's kind of fulfilling the role of the idolized entrepreneur who somehow, you know, escapes or transcends like the hazards of neoliberal capitalism. So in his age range, many people can't afford to get on the housing ladder. People immigrate for these reasons, et cetera, et cetera. So he becomes a somewhat charged version of success, you know, that maybe compensates for, you know, the rather significant structural, you know, parameters within which young people are trying to sort of live their lives and get a start in Ireland at this moment. And then I think the other thing he does, and this didn't necessarily come across at all in the two clips I chose to show you today, but I think the other thing that Noon does is he processes what it feels like to be in an Ireland that's increasingly globalized. He has one clip that was very well seen where he talks about the Italian quarter in his hometown, and it's like Aldi and Domino's Pizza, right? But he does it in a very funny and endearing style. But I think it's quite important to say that he reassures his audience that an Irishness that is intelligible and intact still exists post-globalization. Mm-hmm. And I think that message is really key in ideological terms to what he's offering.
Yeah. And just very quickly, you know, the racism north and south of the border and those coming together of people with union flags and Irish tricolours, you know, that lexicon is a shared lexicon beyond Ireland as well. It's here, it's across Europe. And one of the things that we don't necessarily have on the island of Ireland is a shared vocabulary for how to respond to that. We don't even have a shared vocabulary in the north about how to respond to it. And I do remember after the first IRA ceasefire collapsed, Seamus Heaney wrote an opinion piece in the Irish Times in which he said, we do not have a shared language for peace. And he was right. And like we spent, after that first ceasefire was announced, the North spent a year and a half defining what permanent meant. You know, so the fact that we don't have a shared response to these questions on the island, that means they are going to fester. And people like Bannon will make hay while that particular sun shines. And we need to be very, very careful about the next steps.
And about the exportation of a particular American politics and the sort of the money that is behind it and what it can create. Can I choose? We're well out of time. I'm going to ask one quick question of all the panelists, because you're all either teaching Irish studies in America or American studies in Ireland or Irish American studies or something. What in this moment, you know, we have now spoken all day in sort of veiled and less veiled terms about the difficulty of Irish American relations right now and the difficulty of what it means to represent America anywhere and even to represent Ireland in the US. Speaking as teachers who encounter a new generation of students, what are they interested in? Is there a change in how they're interested, say, in Ireland, in American studies? You know, how has this sort of last year or so, after the glory days, the self-congratulation of the Biden era, that Ireland and America will never be parted, how has that changed across the Atlantic, in your classrooms in particular?
There is a vast political disappointment among young Irish people and American voters. And it's not a bad thing at all. And I kind of welcome it as leverage in the classroom. And in fact, the first meeting of my MA students this year, we spent 25 minutes after class talking about that. And it has closed off for many a route that always felt at least symbolically available. Yeah. And I think there may be opportunities to recalibrate the cultural relationship on the foot of that, which I welcome.
Yeah, Philip.
It's kind of interesting where it's opened up a conversation about having parallel or twin narratives about everything, because we've always had that in the North. We've been separated by the same language and the same problems, but with two different versions of it. So the way that here you have truth and beyond truth, alternative facts, whatever you want to call it under this current administration, it's quite interesting in a Belfast classroom to hear Northern Irish students talking about this difference in definitions of terms, and they can see it plainly in front of them in their own land, in their own 6 counties. And they are adept to that. They see that and they find it very depressing, because one of the students said to me a couple of weeks ago when we were doing 9/11, I said, wasn't part of the thing about all of this and the representation of other people coming in and terrorism, etc. Wasn't part of the thing here in the North that America got that. America could see where it would lead to with thousands of people dying, and that the North was surely a template, a paradigm that should have been followed and should be followed elsewhere. And America had invested so much and now has backed away from all of that. And they're perplexed.
Yeah. Mary, we have a last word on teaching Irish studies in America.
Yeah, I used to teach Elizabeth Bowen's The Last September. It's a 1929 novel set in the early 1920s when everything is in uproar in Ireland. And Bowen was herself kind of Castle Anglo-Irish, and it's set in that kind of world. And it's all about the young woman called Lois who, she's very interested in young soldiers and tennis parties and so on. And she sort of, every now and again, she notices there's an IRA man hiding in the bushes. But she's like, I don't see that. I'm going to a party. And so in the end, the house is burning around her. Because the IRA have come in and the Civil War and so on is all, everything is erupting all around her. And I'd almost stopped teaching it because students were like, I don't know what this means. Like history erupts all around her. She hasn't been paying attention and history overtakes her. Like it's used. I started teaching it again because I had said to myself, this is the last time I'm teaching it, and it was the morning of 2016 election. And we came in to discuss Elizabeth Bowen, and it was the best discussion ever about if you don't pay attention, history's going to come and set your house on fire.
Well, on that happy note, we have been paying attention all day today, so it's not going to happen to us. Please join me in thanking this panel for an amazing discussion.
Whoa, what a day. Yes. It's not quite over. So I'm not sure how many people could summarize all of that in 15 minutes. Wait, I do. I know one person that can. Ted Smyth. I'm sure you all know of Ted. And given his wealth of experience and the way he can link between diplomacy and culture and politics and just being good, I think he's the best person to close off what has been an excellent experience. So, Ted, bring it all home for us.
That's a tough one. Oh, goodness, how do you follow that? Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, let's give a round of applause to those 4 fantastic panels. You'll be delighted to know that I'm not going to stand between you and a drink by trying to summarize everything everybody has said. I would be exceeding foolish. But it has been a fabulous discussion, really engaging, and I think it's been one of the best we've ever had. I think you'd all agree. We've had 7. I've been at all of them. And this one, maybe it's because we had so many damn scholars. Dara and Cóilín did a fabulous job bringing you all in. And you really have done your research. You really bring great depth to the subject matters across the 4 panels. Bridges. We've been talking a lot about bridges. Maybe even a bridge too far. Sorry. This goes back to Mary Harney's question in 2000 when she was Taoiseach. She asked the question, are we closer to Boston or to Berlin? And she went on to say, she was in Progressive Democrats at the time, she was against the taxation policy, and she said, we're actually closer to Boston. It's a lower tax, better growth area than we are to Berlin. Now, a lot of people took issue with that, and we actually, when we put this together 7 years ago, we said, well, we can be both. And I was delighted to hear our Minister for Foreign Affairs and Defence in her brilliant speech today saying you can be both. It's rubbish to have to choose between America and Europe. And needs to be said over and over again. Fintan O'Toole, I think it was he who wrote in the Irish Times that a jockey can't ride 2 horses. Well, we're not riding horses. And I dispute that analogy. I prefer the one, actually Janus, the Roman god, looking both ways, looking backwards and forwards. That's who we are. Nothing wrong with that. Been around for a while. Beginnings and endings. And maybe we should have a little emblem put up here, the Roman god, to celebrate our flexibility, because it's not just a bridge between Ireland and Europe, but it's a bridge between Ireland and Irish America. I don't think we've done enough to engage the next generation. Many of you are teachers and you're doing that, and you're doing fabulous work, and the American Conference of Irish Studies is doing great work. But we had some on margin discussions today about should we be doing more with political science. And it was great to hear Mary Murphy doing that. It's great to hear Notre Dame advertising a position in political science, because a lot of the younger Irish Americans want to hear that subject being analysed and would have benefited from a much wider discussion, than we had today. Today we also remembered that America 250 and the story of the Irish is the story of immigration. Cian brought that out very well, and it's going to lead to some difficult conversations, but important conversations as we go through America 250. And rather than Irish people talking about boycotting, St. Patrick's Day and America 250, it's an opportunity for all of us to celebrate what the American Republic is all about. Liberty, happiness. This is not the current administration. I'm speaking for myself here, obviously, is not reflective, I don't believe, of America. It's not reflective of the spirit of America 250. And we all have an opportunity this year to talk about that and put it out there. And that was what a lot of the panelists got at today. I love the discussion about engaging the complexity and the diverse voices of America. And it really has changed. Marion Casey reminded me of so many good post-colonial moments. Amidst the time when the Republic of Ireland itself is 100 years, still evolving. Northern Ireland, as we heard from the last panel, is still evolving. When I came here in 1776, when I came here in 1976, as it goes back a while, as press officer for the United States, Ireland had organized the governors of the 13 colonies to go to Ireland on a trip, and it was a great success, and it brought home to Irish people just what an important role we played in that particular revolution. And there have been lots of growing pains, and the future is still a work in progress. When I became an American citizen in 1995 in a court in Pittsburgh, I was with 30 other people, and I was really the only English-speaking person. I say Irish-speaking person, but they nominated me to give the speech on behalf of the group, and I was in some doubt. I was very grateful to America. It's where my children could grow up. I was very grateful for the peace process and what they had done for us over the years and over the centuries. But even then, I was saying it's a work in progress. It's something we have to continue to work at. Lots of growing pains still after 250 years, and I think we can remain fascinated by that challenge. And then I think the second panel also said, remember, Irish Americans didn't reject imperialism. They rejected British imperialism, but they were quite happy to be part of the American one. Earlier Irish folks were happy to be part of the Spanish and the French empires, and so it goes on. I mentioned what Mary Murphy was saying, the very complex geopolitical environment we live in now, and it's not very hospitable to a small trading nation. So I think we have to rethink a lot of their priorities and policies. And, the minister said we have to strengthen our security, our economic security, our competitiveness. But she was wonderfully strong in saying, look, the UN still matters. The EU matters. We can't just wish those away. I thought she talked about Ukraine, the need to support its national sovereignty, strong commitment to international law. Even we can walk and chew gum at the same time, which I think it was said in a slightly different context, but it works. But she did then go on to say, and I believe this fervently, there's more that unites us than divides us, and the relationship is dynamic, and we can continue and should continue to work at it. Kimberly, I loved when you referred to, in your brilliant book by you and Carolyn, the green wave, have I got that right? Wall, how you said that, how we built that up to rescue the Irish border from the Brexit business and not to have a border. You referred to it as a black swan event. I thought it was a green swan myself, but there you go. Sorry about that. So now, next generation. By the way, in terms of the next generation, I want to give a shout out to, please give a round of applause to Kevin Sullivan, who's here, who has done so much as a number of hats he wears, Executive Director of the Irish America Partnership, but also Executive Director of the, what should we call it, America 250, Irish America 250, which is putting together a lot of programs around the country and has a fantastic committee. And prior to that, he has been director of the ad hoc committee to protect the Good Friday Agreement, which was mentioned earlier, and which he has just pulled that together with a number of very eminent people, and it's been an extraordinary achievement. And so I'm very grateful. It's people like Kevin who make a difference in this relationship all over the country. They're often unsung, but you know who you are, and really, really grateful to you. So it remains for me to give thanks to the many people who've helped to make this conference possible. In fact, to make what I think is a very successful, bridge over troubled water, which we are putting together. Next year, by the way, I think it's Liam, you said we're going to host this in Dublin. The Clinton Institute working with the Department of Foreign Affairs. So it'll be February, mark your calendars. It's a good time of year to go to Ireland. Hotels are available, rates are cheaper, so you'll receive a céad míle fáilte when you go over there. But in addition to thanking Cóilín and Dara and the Georgetown team, I'd specifically like to thank the BMW Centre, Tina, Laurie, and Kayla, Abe Newman, the director, and the Global Irish, Kayla, Cynthia, and Leah, the Capital Campus events, Wilhelm and the whole team, the fantastic job, the AV people, I could actually hear everything, Russell and the whole team at Blue Street Production, at UCD, Liam, Scott, and Catherine, at Queen's, Katie, at Northern Ireland Bureau, Richard and Cheyenne, and at the Embassy, of course, our brilliant ambassador, Geraldine Byrne-Nason, Stephen, Chris, and Lucia. So a big hand to all of them. And so, you have a question back there?
Another question. If you see our amazing catering team, please thank the catering team as well.
All right. Thanks very much, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.